most school systems are not financially efficient, at least as it relates to the facilities. Stereotypically, they're outdated, rundown, and poorly managed. So working on how to find ways to do that better. And I think the end goal being, how do we get the money that is saved there back into the classroom and back where it is needed most, reallocated in an equitable way.
Hey friends, if you like the Nexus podcast, the best way to continue the learning is to join our community. There are 3 ways to do that. First, you can join the Nexus Pro membership. It's our global community of smart building professionals. We have monthly events, paywall deep dive content, and a private chat room, and it's just $35 a month. Second, you can upgrade from the Pro membership to our courses offering. It's headlined by our flagship course, The Smart Building Strategist, and we're building a catalog of courses taught by world-leading experts on each topic under the Smart Buildings umbrella. Third, and finally, our marketplace is how we connect leading vendors with buyers looking for their solutions. The links are below in the show notes, and now let's go on to the podcast. Welcome to the Nexus podcast. This is the latest episode in our series diving into case studies of real-life, large-scale deployments of smart building technologies. And we emphasize real life here because we're not here to create a marketing story. We're not here to create fluff. We're here to share lessons from leaders that others can put to use in their smart buildings programs. So today we have a story from KIPP Public Charter Schools, and the voice you just heard was Nate Morris, Director of Facilities at KIPP DC. Nate, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, once upon a time, was a teacher working in the classroom anywhere from kindergarten all the way through middle school for a few years. And from there, I started working for DC Public Schools on their facilities team, doing large-scale modernization projects and very large-scale capital improvements on schools. I've been with KIPP for, this is my 4th year. KIPP DC operates 8 campuses in Washington, D.C. We have just under 1 million square feet of real estate as part of our portfolio, 20 schools, just somewhere over 7,000 students now. We have students from pre-K all the way through 12th grade.
Can you talk about your vendor team first?
We have a third-party facility management vendor that has full-time staff in each of our buildings at each campus. And then we have a variety of different vendors. So just speaking on the ones that I think are most relevant, we have Intellimation and their team helping us on HVAC controls and a variety of different sort of building systems and software tools. And then our mechanical vendor, who also handles preventive maintenance as well as any sort of repairs or modifications as it relates to HVAC.
And how many square feet?
Just under 1 million.
When did this project start? And what have been the total results since then for the district?
Visibility, data, to probably oversimplify the answer, but having insights that we were previously lacking, knowing what is working and what is not, and where our attention needs to be. In addition to that, I would say we have made some serious steps forward on energy efficiency as well.
Awesome. All right, so let's bring in part of your team here. Let's start with Terry. So Terry, you've been on the Nexus podcast before, way back in episode 9, I believe. Can you reintroduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Intellimation is a I would call us an MSI now. I've been in the building automation space my entire career, so I don't know, it spans about 30 some years now. In 2014, we made a major transition, I'd say, from an SI to an MSI, focusing on primarily what we call data-driven retro commissioning and optimization. We're still at it.
Awesome. Steve, go ahead, Steve. Can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Steve. I'm the founder of Normal Software. And, I think a little like James, actually, I founded this company because we would see all these great ideas floating around about smart buildings and software and data and all that. And then you'd sort of go out there and wonder where it all was when you actually started, looking at buildings in particular. And we founded Normal to really try to accelerate the deployment of some of these advanced controls, advanced optimization, advanced, even not so advanced, just having the data. And that's our mission at Normal, is to make it simple and easy to connect as many buildings as we can to the applications that are going to drive those kinds of outcomes that Nathan was talking about. Before Normal, I was co-founder of a company called Comfy, where we had an early sort of occupant control app, and then was at Siemens for a couple of years learning how the big guys do it.
I feel like we could have a whole conversation about that topic, but we'll save that for later. Save that for the AHR Expo here. So Nate, let's talk about the story of this project to give people a little bit more depth and background here. So why did you sort of start down this path, and what were your goals?
So when I started at KIPP DC, coming over from DC Public Schools, KIPP DC was about entering its 20th year, and had been in buildings that were primarily new or newly renovated, and had been in a developer mindset for, the entirety of the organization, and stuff was starting to get old and was going to start failing soon. So I was sort of tasked with moving KIPP from the developer mindset into an asset management mindset. And so this project, I think, was a big part of finding out how do we take care of our assets, and how do we find out what we have, what kind of shape they're in, and how we can most effectively and efficiently monitor them going forward.
So Nate, when you think about your technology stack, what was it like before this? It sounds like you came in and got tasked with this asset management role, and you were like, here. And just based on what I know about our industry, 8 different campuses, 8 different buildings, it's probably a hodgepodge of different types of systems.
I think we actually have more building automation systems than we do campuses. We have one campus that actually has 2 operating within the space, because a lot of our buildings are, as we like to call them, Franken buildings, where we have just continued to tack on and add square footage as needed to allow us to expand, which is nice in theory, but has created a real challenge from a management and oversight perspective. In terms of other technology stack, I'm kind of laughing because I don't know that we really had much technology other than the stuff that we were required to have for our buildings to actually function. We had a pretty arcane work order platform that was being used that did not actually spit out usable data in any form or fashion. Very qualitative and really, really lacking on the quantitative sense. And then a sort of a bevy of spreadsheets, nice spreadsheets, but at the end of the day, still a spreadsheet. So that's where we were.
Probably a few clipboards that you haven't mentioned.
Yeah, and not to mention stacks of O&M manuals buried in basements, and hopefully having not gotten wet already. We did have, I should give credit where credit is due, and I think Terry's aware of this too, but we had the software tools that did exist were not necessarily a great fit. They were also very expensive and only half stood up, and not being used by anyone because there was no real life application or need for them. But, we kind of got sold on an idea. Somebody had a nice presentation, and it never actually produced much. And that's not necessarily a knock on the tool, but I think a great illustration of the tool's only as good as the users that are going to be relying on it.
Absolutely. And if you had to sort of summarize the effect that this was having on your task, you were tasked with, turning this into a sort of asset management focused organization. Certainly on the O&M side, what was the impact of this sort of disparate all these disparate technology tools, disparate control systems, lack of technology? Can you just summarize the sort of impact on what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I would say the impact was, the landscape was incredibly subjective. It was hard to know what actually worked well where, because all we had were anecdotes and, again, qualitative data from people who I would say school staff members and school leadership teams often have strong feelings about a lot of things, and which makes them successful at their job, but also makes it really challenging when you're trying to face down something that has some mathematical qualities to it, like facility management. So really trying to put our finger on where to start and where the need was greatest, where we were going to have the most important impact right away.
What were all the options you were considering for solving this problem? And then when did you sort of realize that you needed to engage Intellimation to sort of help you walk through this journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is no shortage of firms trying to sell you stuff. There are plenty of people who will tell you they have the solution. They know how to fix what you're dealing with. They can make your life so much easier. And I think it was actually just that was sort of helping to steer us back to Intellimation. I had worked with Terry and his team in my previous role with the district. And I knew what he and his team stood for and how they operated, and just the sincerity and authenticity. And frankly, I trusted them to look out for our best interests. And it was a matter of just getting the other folks on my team to see that and understand that working with Terry and his team would benefit us down the road and help us find the tools that were, the right fit for what we were ultimately trying to achieve.
Totally. And Terry, can you walk us through, so Nate and the district engage you. Can you walk us through like the roadmap that you had in your mind for them, and what sorts of technologies you felt like they needed at that time?
Like many owners with multiple buildings, they had a number of different building automation systems. I don't know the exact number, but as Nate said, there's one building, I believe it has 3 in it, different ones, but they had a mix, and they were all siloed, isolated. So we're, generally our approach is similar. We had spent some time, as Nate said, on with DGS over quite a number of years, building and figuring out the right sort of application stack. So it always starts with an independent data layer, a middleware layer, to bring all the data together, to trend all of the data in a neutral, non-BAS fashion. And it always includes a central BAS, a typical BAS front end, but a single one instead of 5 or 6 different ones, which is what they had. We did go through a process of evaluating 3 products in that space. We did that really for this project, but we did it for ourselves as well. We're always trying to stay abreast of what's, the best in class product. So BAS is, they needed one. They had 5 and we wanted just one. So we had a single view. And then of course the independent data layer is part of that. And then, one of the good things about KIPP is that they were willing to sort of build out what I would call the complete digital facility management application layer. And I think we're not even quite done there. We've got a BAS. We have we just went through a process where we're evaluating 3 different FDD tools for the application. Part of the IDL course we did that was normal framework, and we did do the data model, and we actually spun that up. In this case, it's in AWS, but it's in their AWS, so they own the data, they own the infrastructure, they own the data model. There's a BAS that's been deployed. We redid all the graphics for all the sites, so it's a single view, single workflow. And again, we're in the process of deploying FDD. We did a pilot on one tool, and then we decided that wasn't the right tool, and we wanted to evaluate 2 others. And I think we're about to pull the trigger or make a recommendation on that. We've been spending some time on a CMMS because they're going to choose. And I think we started out with, I don't know. I mean, that process has been going on for a while. There's a lot of applications in that arena as well. I've looked at them years ago, but anyhow, that'll be included. We added Grafana as a dashboarding tool because we really like Grafana. We think it's well, first of all, it's open source, it's free, and it's really powerful. We've not seen a BAS come close to the types of dashboards you can build with it. So we're a big fan of that. So that's included a time series database, again, an open source one. So we've used as much open source tools as we could. You can't get it all done with open source, but so I think that's the basic stack right now.
And Terry, so I want to bring Steve into this conversation a little bit. Back when you and I talked 4 years ago, Normal didn't exist. You've been sort of keeping up with this IDL space since then, right? I'm sure you've tested out a bunch of different vendors and to sort of plug that hole in the stack. And can you talk about what it was like to, I know you used Steve back in the building robotics days, but Steve starts Normal, and so why'd you pull him into this project?
And that was probably what, Steve, 2 years ago. You felt like it was a good time to actually build what you might call a Trender 2.0, new and improved. And so we started working together and testing that. Steve's a hell of a software developer, so it went quick, it went well, went fast. We saw the what was possible, and so we have been we've been using Normal. Well, we've been using Normal since the start, and we think it's come a long way, and we're pretty pleased with it.
So, Steve, yeah, a lot of people haven't heard of what you guys are doing. This is kind of a little bit of a coming out party, I'd say. This podcast, and yeah. So, can you talk about why you decided this is your next chapter after Lehman's selling Comfy, leaving Siemens? Talk about that opportunity that you saw a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess there's kind of the personal side and the technical, and business side. Personally, so for those who might not be familiar with Comfy, what we started with there was basically an occupant control app. So you could press these little buttons on your phone and say, warm my space or cool my space. And, we'd implement that with backnet gateways that we built. But I thought that was pretty cool. That's kind of a new experience you're enabling in these commercial buildings where, traditionally we would show these pictures in our sales deck of like the locked thermostat or whatever. And we were sort of unlocking that. And you could get energy savings by, having extra data about what people wanted. The part of Comfy I really liked though was that controls part. I thought getting in there and really changing the way the equipment was programmed and the way that it operated was, both sort of rewarding and technically interesting, and had the most possibility for impact. Comfy, I would say, due to what our customers were asking us, turned kind of evolved over the years where that was still a piece of it, but it also did a lot of other occupant tasks like, how do I order lunch in this conference room that, have their uses for sure, but I was kind of less passionate about that. So, when I left Siemens, I knew I wanted to get back into the control space. And like I kind of alluded to, I think there's a lot of great ideas floating around, like, some of these ontologies, lots of advanced control strategies, different ways of programming buildings. But I just felt then, and I still feel to some extent, there's a lack of, great software doing it, basically. And like, there's kind of a gap between like the best practice that people talk about and we know how to do that, and then what you can actually like buy and actually scale. And I think that's real, if you read the journals, it's really there. And so, that's what Normal exists to do, at least for our little slice of the industry. It's to take this independent data layer and, figure out, the capabilities to really make it work technically, and also to make it work, as a business, and make it work from a deployment point of view of how do you make something that does that. I think it was interesting listening to Terry and Nathan's conversation, how much Terry is serving that sort of consultative role there, and that's absolutely needed. There has to be somebody like that in the industry, and I know that's something you've highlighted a lot, James, because it's baffling, and most people have day jobs who aren't going to go like Terry and demand demos for 50 different FDD products, and therefore I think it leads to just lack of deployment of tools that would actually be beneficial, but there's a big cost of for not doing that. So that was our starting point, and we think that by building a great solution, really for people like Terry and Intellimation, I think that you're going to unlock a lot more deployment to this software, because if nothing else, it should be easier to try out those 50 different FDD products, so that instead of doing like some crazy 6-month integration with whichever, after a brutal RFP, you could just kind of do a bake-off, and the cost should be low enough that you shouldn't have to worry so much about the planning up front. I think that you can definitely achieve that.
Absolutely. All right, that's great context for sort of how this sort of stack came together. So Nate, you guys brought Terry in, Terry pulled Steve in. That's how we're all having this conversation. So Nate, can you talk about sort of the main phases of deployment? I think Terry mentioned earlier that you're about 80% done at this point. So can you talk about like, what are the phases of this, and then sort of what's next, to give people like a current status on where this is at?
Yeah, sure. So I think the primary first phase was just seeing sort of determining, working backwards from what we were hoping to achieve, like what sort of things did we want to get out of it, and what was going to help us run our campuses and our network more efficiently from the facility perspective. And Terry, please jump in here if I skip any steps. I know that you may be aware of more than I was on some of these, but yeah, I think then just sort of evaluating the different tools and seeing what was there. Something that's coming to mind, and something I know I was a broken record about early on with Terry, and probably still am to some degree, is just the importance for us to have autonomy with whatever tools we do select. We do not want to end up in a place. One thing I failed to mention earlier is that the Arcane work order platform we do have, that has mostly qualitative data, actually is not licensed to us. It is with our facility management vendor. So should the day come that they take off, the data in theory could just go with them. Depends on if they want to share it with us or not, and if it's worth keeping. But we'd like to build tools where the data is worth keeping, and then we want to be able to keep all of that, and still have the freedom to switch tools, as well as switching vendors, building stuff that can live in-house. So I think that was a big focus for us in that evaluation of the different tools and options that were out there. And then Terry, maybe I'll pass to you to talk about just like the deployment and sort of how you guys work through it from there.
We almost always start with trending all the data as fast as we can immediately. So just because the trend data has a ton of value, and a typical building automation system maybe is trending 10% on average. So we deployed Normal and started trending data. Probably the second piece of that was we started integrating into one BAS front end and redoing all the graphics. That was probably the second stage. Maybe simultaneous there afterwards, we started building the data models. That data modeling is a challenging task. Building graphics is a challenging task. And I think the graphics are always there. It's the foundation of a BAS. I do think we probably overemphasize them, but everyone's used to the fancy graphics, and so we've got to build that. We really like trending all the data and making some good use of that. So that part was the trending of the data, the graphics, then the data model, and then the optimization. So we always include optimization as part of our process. So we started, once we have enough data to look at how things are operating and what's working, what's not working, what's faulted, we come up with this list of, okay, these are the things that are broken you need to fix, and here's the opportunities for optimization. And then we start deploying optimization. This is an interesting project in that although FDD tools there are plenty of, optimization tools there are much fewer of. And we've learned over the years that the optimization is probably worth perhaps more than the FDD is. Certainly there's rebates for it, there's energy savings. FDD is a great tool. In fact, we think now we kind of lead with optimization and follow with FDD. So, but at KIPP, and they were willing to do some testing or piloting, and we've actually currently deployed or testing 3 different optimization solutions. And Steve has recently added a great feature to Normal, which is an SDK to program in JavaScript. So essentially, an engine that we can program optimization, guideline 36 optimizations right into the Normal framework. So we're doing that at one of the schools. Because that space, optimization space, we think is fairly young compared to the FDD space. So there's evolving products in the space. But anyhow, so optimization is what's next. And I would say the CMMS might be one of the final pieces of it. Where we'll have a suite of applications running all against a neutral, owner-owned data model or data model and IDL layer.
Nate, can you talk about so you've brought Terry in this role. He called himself an MSI, sort of a trusted advisor to sort of put together this solution for you. That's great, but I really want to hear from you around the certain design decisions he's made and why it's important for you as you develop this stack. And one of them is this role of the IDL, or this layer that Steve and Normal are providing. Why is it valuable to you as the end user here?
Yeah, I think it was actually mirrored quite nicely in some of the other pursuits that we were making, where, going back to my previous point about having autonomy and building our systems and just the structure of our team and tools and processes in a way that would allow us to plug and play to the greatest extent possible when the need comes. Anecdotally, we had a vendor where that was deeply trusted, had worked with the organization for several years, and tragically the owner of the organization passed away. And it was taken over, and the service went south, and really a sad story. But at the end of the day, we had to move on and find someone new. So just being able to have that as somewhat of an insurance policy, but also just being able to be nimble on that front. So working with Terry, and what allowed and fostered the deep level of trust that we have in him and his team is also knowing that he's not selling anything. He's not selling a specific tool to us. He's not getting payouts based on what we choose, to my knowledge. Just kidding. But yeah, I think so. Talking with Terry and understanding the independent data layer that would allow us to, like Steve was saying, have a bake-off and try a number of different solutions and be able to see that in action without, the agonizing setup part to where exhaustion sets in and you are just need to pick something and you are just tired and you pick a subpar or mediocre product because you're tired of looking, or somebody wants to make a decision. I think it's also worth pointing out something else that popped up as Terry was speaking in terms of optimization pre-FDD. Optimization is how we were able to get our organization on board, with a combination of cost savings from energy use reduction, but as well as, building energy performance standards requirements in DC, the BEPS law that's come into place. It is a very real looming deadline where fines will be levied towards, commercial building operators who are not meeting energy efficiency guidelines, and probably comes as no surprise that DC is on the cutting edge of that sort of legislation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you don't really have time to pick one of these, like Steve said, and have it go 6 months and then realize it's not the right application. It makes a lot of sense. Steve, can you talk about, just like circling back on what Nate just said about the IDL, talk about sort of how you're thinking about the IDL differently, because you're not the first. Normal's not the first IDL on the market, but it's sort of the latest one. So like, how are you thinking about what Normal brings to that conversation?
And there's a couple of ways to come around it. And, I think it is worth kind of double clicking on that independence idea, because people have different ideas of, what you ought to be independent from. I think in the more technical community, people want to be independent from your BAS vendor. That's usually the way it comes up, right? It's like, oh, I've got Siemens, I've got Johnson, I've got Jace's, I want to be independent. I don't want to be independent from that, so that when I have a portfolio like Nathan, I've and KIPP do, that it's, you can do these, consistent reporting across your portfolio. And that's certainly an important dimension of the independence. On the other hand, I think when you get into buying decisions, and when you talk to owners, my take is that commercial independence, independence of service and data portability and ownership are actually the kind of independence that they value, because, at the end of the day, your average owner isn't going to go reprogram their BAS in any case. It doesn't matter who made it, right? And so they're not going to log in and start writing PPCL or GCL plus, or, take your pick of what the automation language is. They're going to rely on their vendor team. And so that having the ability to go, switch out vendors and not be locked into their current provider is actually really valuable. And so that's the kind, and it's maybe more of a true independence from their point of view anyway. And I think that, to some extent, that really comes through in how we've thought about going to market with Normal, which is to go to market first actually with a non-SaaS offering that is primarily delivered through integrators, like Terry was saying at the beginning, where, the product is deployed in AWS. So actually Normal has no access really beyond support. And then really digging in on, what does it mean to be a provider there that can try to achieve some of those outcomes for the owners of commercial independence. And you very quickly come in that, all right, the actual data integration, pulling back NIP points or pulling points from meters or whatever, that's a component, but it's not really enough. I think that's not, a novel product. Okay, so then you augment it with this data model, because now you start to be able to do, some consistent reporting on top of that. And I think that's absolutely required for any sort of, independent data model product. So you can restructure the data, manage the data quality, that kind of thing. But I think you still are not quite there actually, as far as what a true IDL product is. I think you need the final step, which is really to bring in programmability, into that data layer, so that you can. There's many reasons you need that, but it's a industry in a world of sort of 90% solutions, where you can buy products off the shelf that do. You try to buy one that does as much as what you want as you can find, right? But there's always something funny going on everywhere. Every project is something funny, basically. And, if you are locked into a model where either you have to say no, to that project because you can't do that last 10%, or it's, exorbitantly expensive because, you have to put it on the product roadmap and like really productize it and then maintain it forever, right? It's, that's also not quite getting there. And so that's at least the final piece that I think is really needed for these independent data layers is, they have to embed some amount of programmability and extensibility in there, so that you can structure that, that last 10% can drive 90% of the cost, I think, because you have to do custom development and then you have to maintain it forever, right? And so it's very easy to run into a situation where, oh, we've got this crazy protocol, or, we have this IWMS that nobody's ever talked to, or whatever, that can just totally blow any sort of project out. And so how do we structure that technically to keep it so that those easy integrations stay easy and can be maintained, appropriately by the appropriate person in the ecosystem, which I think is not the IDL vendor, because there's just too much funky stuff floating around. And so that for us is kind of the final piece of the product, which is this SDK, to make it really easy to do those one-off developments and then wrap them in the what you need to actually deploy them reliably and repeatedly, so that custom development is as small as it can be, basically, but still meet the need.
The just a quick comment. The one of the things, James, that I'm frustrated with in the building automation industry is that every vendor feels like they have to invent a programming language for their product. So we've got, I mean, every piece of BAS hardware programs with a proprietary programming tool. So the fact that Normal can program in JavaScript, which is a open source programming environment that college students learn, and not PPCL or CCT or whatever proprietary programming tool that's required. I think that's a major step. It's things that we look for. Like, we kind of want a best of breed, but not that doesn't have a vendor lock or require some annual SaaS fees or licensing of the programming tool every year. I won't mention that big product that requires that, which is a pain in the ass. So no licensing JavaScript.
Can I mention it? I mean, the first thing I think about here is you guys are talking about a lot of integrators are using a product called Niagara. Can you guys just talk about the differences between just sort of make it a little bit more black and white? And then I want to get back to Nate and the users of this, but just one more technical question around what are we talking about here compared to what most integrators are using today, which is Niagara?
Well, and I would tell you that I loved Niagara back in the AX days, and back when we had LAN and BACnet competing for, and we had a lot of legacy protocols as well. Niagara was a great integration tool, and it still is. But I think the integration, the need for integration is so much less. It's diminished now as BACnet has sort of taken over, and we really have one protocol, thank God. So Niagara now is I don't know. It's a favorite product. We don't promote it anymore. We think it's overpriced. We think it's proprietary. We think they use a protocol that's non-standard as well and proprietary. It's the only product that somehow our industry seems to think that is open when it's the only protocol left that's proprietary. So Normal has a BACnet stack. It programs in JavaScript. It talks from edge to cloud in MQTT. These are all open protocols, all standard open protocols. Yeah, I think it's I think it's a nice step forward. I think Steve's done a great job, and it's not a SaaS, doesn't require licensing fees every year, and programs in a standard programming environment.
And if I could jump in, the way I sort of look at Niagara, right, is if you look at the 90s and the protocol wars, I think that's where it got it started, where you wanted a single pane of glass on top of all sorts of field protocols. And that's really where how it got its initial traction. I would not go so far to say as there's only one protocol. I think today, whenever you talk to people, but they have shifted. I think inside of HVAC, there's really BACnet, but on the other hand, I think the trend is also for more integrations across verticals and more integrations across buildings, with different SaaS platforms. And so the need for what that integration box does, I think, has shifted a little bit from something which, the legacy was more on these field protocols where it's very low level stuff of like, oh, can we implement, integrate Modbus and CAN bus and KNX and all this other junk in the building, but still at the building. Whereas today I think that the place to look is more on these API integration platforms where you have an enterprise with, tens of products with different APIs that you can't really change, and like they're all fine, basically. Like those APIs are all fine, they're all REST or something sort of reasonable, but you still need to integrate them somehow, and in order to do reporting or to do controls on top of all of them. And I think that's kind of a different problem than what you face, at the field bus level, and something that Normal certainly strives to fix for people, basically.
Got it. Okay, so we took a nerdy diversion, as we usually do on the show. I want to go back to our case study, our story here. So Nate, if I can summarize that quickly, you guys brought Terry in. Terry and the Intellimation team sort of designed this technology stack of the normal as the IDL, a single consolidated supervisory control software or front end, and then you have a visualization application, an FDD application, an optimization application, and a CMMS. So all the people that have seen all of our stack visualizations can now picture the entire stack that we're talking about here. But let's take it back to the user themselves. And so you mentioned you guys have a third party facility management firm. Can you talk about, okay, how is this tech stack getting used, and sort of how have you sort of digitized the FM process using this technology stack?
I think there are other tools that sort of fall in that same, I would say, fall into the same realm in terms of our facility management technology sort of bucket, thinking of like access control, which is a big one for us that we've been consolidating and just trying to, achieve, as well as intrusion detection and having enterprise level, really modern control over these systems. So just to note that it does like touch a lot more, I think, than even we're speaking about here. Some of the tools you mentioned, like just to clarify, like the CMMS tool, we're not there yet. I'm looking forward to having everything where it is a neat and smooth operation. And you can start to see it coming into focus. A couple different ways I would think about that. I think we think about it is number one, just from like end user experience and how quickly we're able to address issues and how quickly we're able to make adjustments, and sort of thinking of it in that, Domino's pizza tracker way as to, okay, a teacher has this issue in their classroom. How does it, what are the steps that it goes along to get resolved? And then, the other sort of parallel lane with that is how can we use these tools to make data informed decisions about how our equipment is performing, where we should be doing, how we should be doing our capital investment strategy. And really there's always too many projects and not enough capacity or money to support them. And it has been, unfortunately, a very subjective process to date. A lot of times the loudest voices win out. The people who are most well connected and know whose sleeve to tug on are going to get the projects they want. And we are trying to really sort of mix in some fairness, some equity, and really get that to a point where we can defend those decisions with data to back it up. So I think those are really the biggest use case applications for both of these. And then from that, I guess, speaking to your question about how our facility management vendor, who, I'm on the phone with them or in meetings with them multiple times a day, making sure that the tools are, they can be trained to use them. They know where to go for what. And then also, standing up that sort of how-to documentation on a lot of stuff on our end internally, so that should the facility management vendor, change, or should our mechanical vendor change, or should our, pest control or whoever, especially when it comes to the CMMS, like it's going to be easy for us to do that bake sale, that plug and play, and make sure that we're working with vendors who are competitive and, providing great service. So I think that is sort of how we're thinking about it. And then obviously, I'm sure Terry's sleeve is run ragged from me tugging on it about where to go for sort of what answers based on what information we might be looking for. Some of it gets down into the nitty gritty and level of, I would call it pettiness, of maybe even a school staff member or a school leader who is saying, my office is always burning hot. And we can go look at data to see what temperature is it actually, and how has it been performing, and maybe actually which rooms are incredibly hot. A project that Intellimation helped us out with early on is, we have kitchens, cooking equipment commercial cooking equipment in spaces that weren't necessarily designed to house all of it and have since been retrofitted, except for on the, cooling front. And so we have staff members who are in these rooms for several hours a day when the temperatures are in the high 80s. So it was easy to make a decision to get a mini split in that room and provide really, truly needed comfort to those staff.
I want to, Nate, talk about VRF a little bit in terms of data, because Nate's been very successful. One of the challenges from a data perspective for VRF systems, their backnet gateways have historically not provided, they provided what I would call superficial data about the actual cassettes, temperature. But if you needed to get, so a VRF system has these cassettes, which are fairly simple, fan, an EV valve, and the refrigerant coil. But they have these compressors that are incredibly complex. And the gateways have historically never given you compressor level data. So to get that, you have to walk out on site with the service tool, plug in the service tool, and get that. Things are changing in that world, and KIPP has had some real problems with VRF, as a lot of our clients have. Right, it's a great product, but it's a sophisticated product. If you don't install it right and operate it right, it can give a problem. So there's lots of failures. Anyhow. Nate really pushed this envelope. We knew that, for instance, Daikin. So I think at KIPP, which is the first place we got this done, we actually have VRF service level data as backnet data. Right, we have it coming from Daikin. That we're talking about 22 points of data from a compressor. We've never had before. All the refrigerant temperatures, pressures, EV valve positions, frequencies. So we got it out of Daikin, and we've got it out of LG via a cool automation product. So we're seeing a major trend in the industry, and so that's a really and I mean, to me, we now have service level data, so it's deep down data that we can actually do FDD on at the backnet level as opposed to a service tool. They're very handy for troubleshooting future problems or compressor failures. So we'll trend that data with like normal every 5 minutes, like we do every other piece of data. That data was never, even the service level tools, when they would plug in, they'd get 2 weeks of data, not data forever. So nifty move.
So Nate, let's talk about lessons learned from this. I want to sort of talk about this in a way that another school director of facilities can sort of listen to this podcast. Maybe they skip over all the nerdy stuff, but they really sort of understand how to implement this from your perspective. So if you were starting this again, what are the challenges or sort of roadblocks that you'd want to look out for or advise someone to look out for?
I think going back to the earlier point of there is no shortage of folks selling solutions, and finding a way to understand what you actually need. Because not all data is created equal. Not all more data is not necessarily always better. Good data is always better. And I think I'm using data as like a broad term here, but understanding what information is needed at your campus for your school system, for your district writ large, like what do you need to make informed decisions? And so even working backwards from that, what are the details that you would need to know in order to, make those decisions, and then doing your homework. And if the reality is, like, I didn't necessarily do my homework, but I know that Terry does his homework. And so finding partners who you trust that can understand the conversation that you guys were having when I don't know those acronyms, and I don't necessarily need to. I think it's important for folks in overseeing school educational facilities to have a decent bullshit detector, pardon my language. But know when someone is blowing smoke up your ass, and know the right questions to ask, and to look for, like, read the fine print. I have seen some organizations that will sell you on, we'll pay for all these upgrades to to your facilities, there's going to be huge energy savings. And then we'll just take half of those savings. And you come to find out that the half they are taking are based on their projections that were made for 10 years. And then all the recommendations they have for the energy efficiencies that they're willing to pay for, lion's share of them are behavior based. And teachers and everyone in education knows very well that behavior change is not easily implemented. But if they're taking the cut of projected, savings, you may be actually paying them for what they're doing because you're not actually, those aren't actualizing and coming into being. So not to go down the rabbit hole on that one experience, but I think it is really just about finding some partners you trust who know the landscape, know what tools work, what tools don't, finding other organizations. And I think that's been really helpful too, is even working with partners that we have at KIPP Texas, who, is a much larger network of KIPP schools serving about 35,000 students in a number of different cities across Texas, and just seeing how they're doing it. So yeah, that would be, those would be the pieces that stand out to me the most as really critical steps.
Can you talk about any challenges related to the business, making the business case for, because this is not a traditional way that technology is implemented in school districts, if there is a traditional way that technology is implemented in school districts, right? So how do you make the business case and sort of pay for this sort of new way of doing things?
None of this would happen if we couldn't make that case, right? Like I think anybody working in a school system knows that being able to point out and speak to the bottom line is going to be really important. And why is this money worth putting in here? And I think, so a big piece of it is, again, knowing the landscape politically, even like what are the goals and priorities of not only, the leadership team of your school district, but of the school board, of the local politicians who are, sort of setting the goalposts up and potentially moving them around at times, and being able to speak to their priorities. So connecting it to what people are interested in. And as it relates to the money, it's oftentimes like the savings, right? Like, what's the ROI on this? What's the payback period before we see the benefit of this? Or if there isn't that as clearly to speak to, not all of it necessarily, a CMMS tool isn't necessarily going to have an ROI or a payback period. It's more so about how much time are we spending on this now and how well are we doing it? And if you can point to that, and for us, I think it was internal trust as well. When there's a lack of data, it's hard to point at that data to illustrate that things are not working well. So I think it's a combination of showing what current struggles are, but also what is possible if we do it differently. And that goes back to, again, looking to those other school systems that are operating in different ways, and they might be doing one thing really well and other things, not as great. So it might take a few trips around to find the combination of stories and situations to get there. And I still don't know that we are fully there. I'm still on the hunt for new ideas and new ways to create efficiencies in our work.
Awesome. Steve, Terry, anything to add to this, the challenges and lessons learned?
I think the ROI conversation is always really a good one, but I think the point to dwell on there is you got to figure out where this data platform is going to land at the end of the day, right? Are you selling an outcome? Because a lot of the talk in our space is, oh, you got to sell outcomes, you got to sell outcomes, you got to sell outcomes. On the other hand, like, what's the ROI of your email system? Like, what's the ROI of Salesforce for a SaaS company, right? It's like, I don't know, you have to have it to do your job, right? And I think that a lot of these IDL conversations, number one, the cost of them is going to go down. They're not as expensive as people think. And number two, I think it's just people aren't going to make a spreadsheet for that. They're going to realize that if you have 20 buildings and 8 campuses, what does it mean to professionally manage that environment? Well, it means being able to look at the friggin' data, if nothing else. And I think that that's going to be more the conversation. Where the ROI conversations will come in then is how do we leverage this to improve our vendor process so that we can have a bake off? How can we really hold our different vendors accountable using that data to make sure that we're getting what we paid for, which is, an evergreen conversation, I would say, in this industry. But I think once you cut that properly scoped, that data piece, it's just going to be something that, if you want to be a facilities manager in the 21st century, you're going to need it.
But I would argue that thermal comfort, indoor air quality are also not ROIs necessarily, but they come right along with it, because we can show thermal comfort charts, indoor air quality, ventilation rates. So that data really helps that. And I know in schools, that's particularly since COVID, that's become obviously important. If you can show that data across months, years, that visibility is really valuable.
Yeah, I would echo Terry's sentiment about air quality being a new focus amongst schools everywhere, especially with the student outcome setbacks that have come as a result of COVID. I mean, math scores across the U.S. have bottomed out in terms of where they were and where they were headed. So being able to show anything that is going to have a positive impact and data like that shows the outcomes of those impacts on student performance is going to matter. And to Steve's earlier point, like any school system will have, and probably even wider than that, I'm just going to speak of what I know here, but I have yet to meet anybody who works for a school system in this world who has not dealt with a vendor that's not meeting the bar, and where they feel they're being, they're paying for way more than they're actually getting, and maybe their hands are tied on stuff and they have to call this one vendor. And even when they come out, they don't get the service they need, or they don't get the follow-up they need. And so finding that story and being able to say, wouldn't it be nice to have that autonomy, that independence, having, by way of the IDL and anything else, to look at other options and really find somebody who, if we're going to pay this much, we might as well get our money's worth.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for the three of you for coming on the show. This was great. 3 different perspectives: software development integrator, master systems integrator, and the building owner or the director of facilities. So thanks for humoring me as we hit this from all these different angles. But I think this will be a great conversation for people to listen to sort of follow along in your footsteps. So thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, friends, thank you for listening to this episode. As we continue to grow our global community of changemakers, we need your help. For the next couple of months, we're challenging our listeners to share a link to their favorite Nexus episode on LinkedIn with a short post about why you listen. It would really, really help us out. Make sure to tag us in the post so we can see it. Have a good one.